We're very lucky to have uh, with us for our second session a distinguished alumna, Jennifer Walling. She has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree at NRES in Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences from the University of Illinois. During her time here, we were discussing this just now. She was one of the founders of the SSC, the Student Sustainability Council on campus, and has an interesting story to tell about the institutional hurdles that she faced in doing that. So we are grateful to her for her great work here on campus while she was a student. She also received a doctorate from the University of Illinois College of Law. Now, she has served as the executive director for the Illinois Environmental Council since January 2011. So 10-year work anniversary at the Illinois Environmental Council. And some of her work and achievements in that 10-year period, she's drafted, lobbied, and passed hundreds of bills in Springfield while working to build the power, expertise, and relationships of the entire environmental community here in Illinois. She's worked on the Future Energy Jobs Act and is currently working to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act. She's been a statewide leader in composting policy since 2009, when she worked to pass the first commercial composting law in Illinois. She is also involved in the Natural Areas Stewardship Act. So extremely busy person involved in the legislative side of the environmental agenda with a lot of successes to her credit. We're looking forward very much to hearing what she has to say on her subject for the day, which is advocating for the environment. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks. Definitely thanks for having me. And if folks would like to just write in the chat a little bit more about yourselves, where are you from, if you're from Illinois, from somewhere else, what major you're pursuing, what interest you have in policy. I'd be fine if you guys want to just introduce yourselves a little bit, and I'll look at those a little bit later. I want to make sure I cover everything. And then there's this message here that you could type a question in the chat or send it as a private message. I definitely am interested in any questions that you have about getting policy done. So, and I kind of have a smattering of things in my presentation today, because I know you all are talking about policy and environmental policy and how to get it done. And so I have a lot of topics on this. So this is going to be a short kind of primer. And then I'll give you a little information about what's going on in the Illinois General Assembly this year. But I'll just start off with, a couple of things are going to be a really important part of my premise, which is one, you can write the best, most ideal, greatest policy ever. And if you cannot pass it into law, it's just as bad as the worst policy, just because it doesn't exist. You haven't gotten it done. And so making sure that you have a plan of attack for getting your policy done is important, but also maintaining flexibility that you may have a route to get to from A to B, but somebody else may have a different route that still gets you to B, but goes in a different place. So definitely want to do that. So yeah, thanks. If folks can just tell me what they're working on, that'd be great. I know a lot of science students in here, so this will be great. But I'm going to go through a few things that you should know if you're working with policy and advocacy. And I have titled this a little tongue-in-cheek, How to Win Friends and Influence Lawmakers. This is off of the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a book that I definitely recommend as one of the things that I think that students should read. Sorry, I'm going to turn off my fan behind me. So that is what it's from. It's a book definitely think will help you with your education. I'm from the Illinois Environmental Council. We're a group that brings the Illinois environmental community together to influence decision makers. We have over 100 now affiliate organizations, and these are groups that range from neighborhood environmental justice organizations like People for Community Recovery, Neighbors for Environmental Justice, etc., to big international groups like Natural Resources Defense Council or the Nature Conservancy. And they're all members of ours. And we lobby on their behalf in front of the state legislature, but also city council, other units of government. We make sure that they are well represented and that there's one voice for the environmental community and that they can't just tear us all apart and have us all going different ways from different organizations. So that is a little bit about what we do. And I have, I did as we said in my bio, a bachelor's and master's in NRES. I did the master's at the same time as my JD. And then after that worked for Environmental Law and Policy Center and then a state senator. So I have been at this for over 10 years now, and our organization is 46 years old. So just have been really glad to contribute to the organization's history. I'm going to go through a few things, a very quick civics lesson. I'm going to talk about lobbyists, stakeholders, power and relationships, as well as messengers, and then give you all some best practices to contact lawmakers and build relationships. And then I'm going to talk about state legislation if we have time. So I am going to start a little bit. This is my like teeny tiny primer. I'm assuming that like you have some idea of some of this. I do teach a NRES 499 course in the fall where we go through like how to research laws and statutes, etc. But I just want to provide some context to what I'm talking about when I do this. At the state level, there can be different names in different states, but typically a bill is the name for the document that amends a statute, and the statutes are the law of the land. There can be other types of law, like case law, that is determined by the courts, but the vast majority of law is legislative law through statute. So a bill becomes a statute. We'll talk a lot about bills today. At the local level, an ordinance becomes municipal code. Sometimes those are a little bit interchangeable, and people will refer to the actual municipal law as an ordinance. It's both. It's both like the bill and the vehicle, but just to give you a little bit of vocabulary there. At any level of government, there's going to be regulatory proceedings, and in Illinois, these are called administrative rules. These are the details that the agencies need to enact the bills that have become statutes. So this just gives you a little bit of, we could say that the IEPA needs to write rules for coal ash closure facilities. So they may add specific items that would need to go through the various processes and get approved on coal ash. And then there also can be agency policy that can also be policy, but that policy is not usually, it can be written down, but it's something that is just how the staff interact, how work is done. And that can be so important in how government workers enforce and implement whatever law that they've been given. Just the color to that can really add or subtract meaning to your policy. So just talking a little bit about policy vehicles. I'm going to give you, this is our process summarized. This is a very, very brief process summarized. I'll show you why in a second. But there's different procedures in different states, but it's very typical. You introduce a bill in a chamber, it goes to committee, floor vote, second chamber, committee, floor vote, governor that may veto it or not. In some states, I don't have this here, you have a parallel process where the bills can go, and actually in Congress, you have a parallel process where the bills can go through the Senate and the House at the same time, and then go through like a reconciliation, and then go off to the executive body to be signed or vetoed. Not every state has that. In Illinois, you have to pass the same language on the same bill in each chamber before it can become law. So there's some concurrence is the procedure that happens if you change some language in the second chamber. So this is the process summarized. This is what the process can look like. And I'm finding new stuff out every year. So there are some times where I've seen bills skip committee. There are some times where I've seen bills just very quickly end up at third reading. There's things called shell bills and vehicle bills. I have an entire 2-hour civics for environmentalists presentation that if any of you ever wanted to watch, we have it on YouTube and I can share it there. But we go way more into detail into how a bill becomes a law. And this is just Illinois. In the federal government and other states, there are very similar procedures that could have 100 different steps to it for how a bill becomes a law. But still, understanding the process and the decision makers for whatever policy that you want to make is incredibly important to determining whether you can pass and implement that policy. And so, just even for example, Actually, I'm going to go here. This is from a few years ago, but there are similar deadlines this year, although they're all getting waived because of COVID. But there are deadlines in most state legislatures of when you need to pass a bill by, when you need to get out of committee, et cetera. And so if somebody comes to me with a new bill idea like this week, honestly, if somebody came to me with a new bill idea this week, I might scream very loudly and use a lot of bad language at them because this is committee deadline week. And it would be really hard for me to get something done for them this week. Whereas if they're bringing me something, July, August, September, October, that gives me plenty of time to prepare for our January through May session. So understanding that can be really important to a policy. And if you need something that needs to get enacted like right away too, that's something important to know too, is when you're going to be able to do it. So process is important for determining the way you can enact a policy. But I'll go to this. This is a spectrum that I teach in my class. And just looking at policies going from voluntary to mandatory in terms of environment and adoption. And I start kind of with education. And this is the top here is voluntary, and then you end up with mandatory. We have education, removing barriers, state leading the way, incentives, and mandates as different types of policies. And some of these kind of blend together, but I just want to give some bare bones discussion about where these might fit in the spectrum. So, as I've taught this, everybody, especially on environmental issues, I hear so many times that education is the solution to an environmental issue, whether it's recycling or invasive species or that sort of thing. But I think there's something important to think about when you're thinking about an educational policy, because I think we think about educational policy and we think, oh, like it's free, we're just going to educate people. But an educational policy has a lot of programmatic components. You need to find funding for it. You need to say who's going to do the education. You need to say how often it's going to happen, and just this repeated cycle where it ends up not being this like very voluntary thing that you thought it was. I actually there's some innovative laws where maybe the state requires education to be done by a different party. So like there could be things where the Department of Natural Resources might have something on their website to educate you about lead sinkers to be used in fishing, which lead is really bad for people, and we should need to be switching over to tungsten sinkers for fishing. So the Department of Natural Resources might do that, but they may pass it off. So if we need to do some education on paddling safety, maybe if you are going to be renting a canoe in Illinois, you got to watch a video first, or you have to sign a waiver, or any of that sort of thing. Or if you want to educate about invasive species, the same thing, where you may be passing on who is doing the education to somebody else. But it's just something to think about when you are doing a policy, that we may think of education as being the easiest step, and with state governments as imperiled as they are, it might not be. I also talk a lot about removing barriers. So this is another voluntary step that could be taken that would help with sustainability. So this might be, for example, if you want to encourage solar adoption, what barriers are in place that would say you can't put solar on a roof? So are there height requirements off of structures that need to go on a roof? Is there some sort of electrical component that might be a problem for solar going on a roof? Those are all different types of barriers that might be in place that would prevent sustainability from happening. And there's barriers in a lot of places. So for example, in Illinois, gray water infrastructure for plumbing is still technically kind of illegal. You can get a variance for it, but if you want to set up something where you put gray water that's collected by the rain or your sinks into a toilet, you need to get a variance from the Department of Public Health, because we don't have those items legalized in our plumbing code. So trying to make that easier is a barrier that we've tried to remove for decades at this point, but there's a fight there. But there are lots of places in policy where you might want to remove a barrier. State leading the way is another item, and this is where the state itself might be doing something. So many states got involved in procurement of recycled paper or other recycled products that really spurred the recycling market development at the time when recycling was kicking off throughout the United States. There's a lot of things that states can do in terms of recycling or green energy or that sort of thing, where they adopt the policies first within their own state government. There also are incentives. These may be things where there may be tax breaks, sales tax, property tax. There can be incentives that are permit speeding up, all sorts of things that government can offer that they can increase the speed or reduce the price to make sure that that you can do the behavior. We just worked on a ordinance in the Chicago City Council that waives all permit fees if you are going to replace lead service lines. And that is actually substantial because it can be a minimum of $3,000 to replace a lead service line just for permits within the city of Chicago. So that was an incentive that we passed. But incentives can be difficult because state budgets are tight. And anytime that you take anything away from the sales tax or property tax base, you may be causing somewhere else a need for revenue. So it's a thing to think about. And then mandates might be a thing where you require something. So when we're requiring 100% clean energy by 2050, that's a mandate. And there may be other mandates that we need to do. And this is just the concept that at first we're trying to get people to volunteer their sustainable behavior. And then you get a lot of adoption, And in the end, there may be just a few people that aren't adopting the behavior. And that's how you get to them, is with these mandates. So this is just, what we're getting at with the policy spectrum and the different policies that might be out there. I also encourage you, this is all messed up in terms of my slide, I'm sorry, but ilga.gov is the site where you would look at bills for Illinois. Every state has their own state website where you can look at this. You can read the full text of the bill. You can view the votes and how people voted, the different sponsors, the current status, all here in the bill status. So that's my very brief discussion about process, and there's a lot that you can do to learn how to look up laws, look up bills that can be really important for your work. Stakeholders and interest groups is the next topic that I want to cover here. This is also something really important if you want to get a bill done. I may just refer to at the rail, although we're not at the rail this year. This picture on the right is a picture of the Illinois State Capitol, and there is a rail around the third floor where the chambers are located, and that is where all of the lobbyists hang out at the rail, and we wait for lawmakers to come by and flag them down and talk to them about different bills. There's other ways we get in contact with them, of course, and like this year, it's a lot of texting, a lot of phone calls, etc. So that is the rail. But there's a lot of other business that goes on about the rail, and this is talking about stakeholders and interest groups. And I know that I say lobbying to people, and there's a lot of people that are like, oh, that's awful and dirty and gross. Why do we need lobbyists? There's that sort of thing. Or there's people who don't know what a lobbyist is. Lots of reactions when I say kind of what we do and what I do for a living. But lobbying is advocacy. So an advocacy is the work that you're doing to try to advance a particular policy. So that's a little bit about lobbying. And a thing to know too is that lobbyists lobby lobbyists. So I spent a lot of time talking to other lobbyists from other organizations about bills that we might want to see move forward, or we might want to oppose, and just trying to see how we can make the bill better, have the right language, etc. And then, these relationships matter, being able to be trusted, any of this, really important. So relationships matter in order to get a bill done. And there's different types of lobbyists. So there might be mission-driven lobbyists are a lot of what I do, a lot of nonprofit organizations. We don't get paid as much, and we still have more and more work no matter how many bills we do. So that's a little bit about mission-driven. There's business-driven that are often referred to as in-house. These might be folks that are, say, the lobbyists for Walmart, or the lobbyists for the manufacturers, etc. So a lot of people have their own different lobbyists. There also can be contract lobbyists. These are people who have great relationships. Maybe they worked in state government before. Maybe they know a lot about different issues, but they're hired guns, and they may be one issue, they may be a lot of issues. They have varying levels of effectiveness in order to get stuff done, and so they're referred to as contract lobbyists. But there are hyper-special interests. These are just some that are out there that are real government affairs lobbying organizations that represent different things. And there is somebody lobbying for and against every issue that might be out there. And then just thinking about in terms of policy, especially with what you're working on, who is lobbying for your work? So in Illinois, IUC kind of represents a lot of environmental groups, but there's also Sierra Club, Environmental Law and Policy Center, um, lots of different organizations within Illinois might be environmental groups with their own lobbyists. So this is um, just some that are out there, and they may represent you in different ways. So, and this is, we work from the concept of power building, that, bringing all these little fish together will help us go after the big fish. So the Times for Democracy actually works, and we organize. So I'm gonna put this forward too, because I know a lot of you are science students that I'm seeing in the chat. And I want to put forward something that I learned, or I had a speaker say at a conference a couple years ago, and I strongly agree with. And actually, we may start with this: that votes are not taken based solely on data and facts. Votes are taken based on values, relationships, and beliefs. So I work with a lot of scientists and academics that really want to provide a 30-page report on clean energy to a lot of lawmakers, or provide a lot of data to a lot of lawmakers. And there are lawmakers who will read that data and will look at that data, but they do it because they have a value in science, or they have relationships with organizations that have given it to them. Or unfortunately, we talk about believing in science, but not only is this the way that lawmakers take the votes, this is a way that a lot of voters take votes, taking them on values, relationships, and beliefs, not solely based on facts and figures. And so it's a thing that we think about in the way that we build power, and a thing to think about in the way that you might enact policy. Facts and figures they can be helpful. Expertise can be super helpful in establishing your trust, your prowess within a state legislature. But in the end, it's going to matter who is elected, what do they believe in. So that's something that we work on a lot in terms of building power. And this is directly from the Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I want to talk about a few things here that we use. And these are tips that you can use in any of your everyday life, not just in lobbying lawmakers, but it's something that I find very important to lobbying lawmakers. Some of the things that we do in the work we put together is definitely trying to see things from the other person's point of view. So a lot of people will ask me, especially in this environment, and I don't mean to be partisan here because we are actively bipartisan, but I get the question a lot: how do you talk to Republicans about climate change? And my answer is, I don't talk to Republicans about climate change. I talk to Republicans about the economic development aspects of clean energy and renewable energy and changing the transportation system. I'll talk to them about economic investments and jobs and development. And it's something that can be very successful, especially with the right Republicans that might be within our state legislature. So we've put forward a bill that is called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. That's 100% renewable energy by 2050, decarbonization of the power sector, electrification in the transportation sector, with a lot on equity and job growth, particularly in frontline communities. And we didn't call it the Climate Change Act because we did a lot of work and a lot of talking to folks about it, and the folks that we could influence, like jobs was a stronger motivator than climate change in terms of bringing forward the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So trying to see things from another person's point of view is really important. Another tactic that we often use is start with questions to which the other person will answer yes. A lot of change in Springfield can be very incremental. And I find that, people worry that if they don't get the whole apple at once, they're never going to get any of it. And I often find that not to be true. I've seen a lot, for example, on mercury. Like 15 years ago, mercury was a really hot topic in policy, and we banned mercury thermometers, we banned mercury in thermostats, we banned mercury in a lot of different places, mercury in dental offices, mercury in coal plants. And the very first bill that we did on ending mercury usage was really hard. And then we got to the end, it was like mercury in like personal care products, and that one was like so easy. And so these things are definitely incremental. And definitely starting with a question which the other person answers yes is important. There's often relationships that I have with lawmakers where, especially if they may lean on this issue, I only go to them about bills that I know that they can vote yes on and not get hurt back home, not going to have any impacts. Like, it is in their interest to vote yes on this. And then they vote yes, they have a pleasant experience, they get a lot of praise, they get a lot of thank yous, and then they want to answer yes again and again and again. So this is another thing, another tactic that we might use in trying to influence lawmakers. Um, I think this is the portion where I'm talking about messengers as well, but also recognizing that I might not always be the best messenger to talk to every lawmaker is important as well. And so, as an example, one of the things we've done on the Clean Energy Jobs Act is work with this business owner from the Truman National Security Project who was in the first Gulf War, came back to the United States, saw a bunch of people die in oil fields, and said, I don't ever want to see that again. I'm going to work in solar, started a solar company. So he is a veteran in a solar company in Illinois. We gave him a list of all the veterans that were within Illinois and said, go talk to these people, regardless of party or what they believe about clean energy. And he just had a lot of success connecting with other veterans on national security issues and clean energy and climate change. And so that is a point where we may be looking at who the best messengers might be to deliver the message that might not be us. And then I'll just as a thing here, telling somebody you're wrong has never ever, it might cause them some shame and maybe they'll change their behavior, but it's never ever caused somebody in a political area to change their mind and etc. So just how else can you look at this in order to change somebody's mind that isn't just saying you're wrong? So this is a really great book to read. It's a little old fashioned. But a lot that we look at in how we get policy done. And I have a few things here on how to contact your state legislator. So I'm actually going to go, this is from the Congressional Resource Management Task Force. They did a review of constituents in the federal government. They looked at senior managers and staffers in congressional offices, and they went from for all of these different things and how they influence people. And you can see the more individualized and personalized that your contact gets to an elected official, the better it might be. So here's some things that we recommend, particularly in Illinois. If you care about something, sending in a form email or letter is fine. The more you personalize it, the better if you're able to through whatever form email system you can use. Phone calling, writing a personal letter or email is important. Social media can be up here too in terms of influence, but it can be a little tougher because a lot of times lawmakers don't know that you're a constituent when you're posting on social media. And so that is something that might be important in order to get a contact through. And also sometimes lawmakers don't run their own social media. If they're posting about like what they cooked for dinner last night or their cats or something, it's probably their own social media. But if they're posting mostly work events, it could be staff running it. So it's a thing to think about. But also attending events or going to in-person meetings that might be with a decision maker, a good way to build a relationship. And we always recommend building those relationships before you ever need anything. And in fact, like the way that we might work with lawmakers is that we will work on educating lawmakers about environmental issues even before they get into office. So when candidates are running, we will provide a whole bunch of educational information on a lot of different topics to all the candidates, regardless of party, so that they're educated. We might do a briefing with them and walk them through the different issues that they might need to vote on. Because any lawmaker, whether it's city council or a state lawmaker, they have to work on so many different issues. It's very rare to have a person that walks in knowing everything about everything. It's rare to have somebody that knows things about energy, but also wildlife or land conservation. These are all things that the average person only knows a little bit about, and now they need to know not only environment, but things like pensions and cemeteries and all of these different things. So this is why building these relationships can be important. I definitely recommend in the first step in advocacy is getting to know who your elected officials are. Just you look them up. Who are they? Who are the people who represent you in Urbana-Champaign or at home? No matter where you're at, and know them all up and down. So that's a little bit about advocacy. I have some tips, including be polite to staff, having been a staff person, thanking them, knowing more about them and their position. And then a big tip that we have in advocacy or in anything you might do, make an ask and then let them answer. Make an ask and then shut up. This is something that puts a lot of pressure on people to answer something. And a lot of them will try to avoid it. They'll talk about stuff back home. They'll talk about an issue, but make an ask and try to get an answer out of them. That's exactly what lobbying is all the time. And I don't always get an answer. Sometimes I get something that's a little flaky, but do my best. So this is my email. And if you have questions, definitely feel free. But I think I'm stopping sharing for a second, and definitely feel free to put some questions in there. But I also want to review a little bit about what's going on with the environmental legislative agenda. So this is our soon to be debuted website that has our 2021 agenda on it. And I won't go through all of these, but I'm just going to review some of the bills that I know we're working on. And so you have questions about these, you can ask as well. I know that above all on any of these, we do have a really big environmental justice permitting bill, but it doesn't have a bill number yet because we're still working out some language with the governor's office. But it'll be something that responds to situation like the General Iron metal shredder facility moving from a wealthy white neighborhood to a Black and brown middle class one. So it'll be solving some issues like that in terms of permitting and looking at cumulative impact in environmental justice areas. So that one real important. But Clean Energy Jobs Act, I talked a little bit about. It's advanced from committee and really important bill. There's a lot of energy bills though, so we're really hopeful that we get something done. We're also opposing a number of bills that are supporting fossil fuels, et cetera, getting rid of solar. That's the sort of thing. Those bills are out there. We also, I talked about removing barriers. We're trying to work on a bill that would break down barriers that restrict solar energy at housing HOAs and condos. So we have that there. Doing a lot on different water pollution. So lead service lines, super important. Illinois has 1/8 of all the lead service lines in the nation. So we'll be working on that one and trying to get those lead service lines replaced. It's a very expensive problem though. The PFAS is something, the polyfluoroalkyl substances that are out there. Michigan has had a huge problem with them, and Illinois is starting to do some testing that is showing issues in groundwater with PFAS. We're working on banning them, phasing them out in firefighting foam, and banning it just in general, especially if it and some transparency in emergency situations. There's lots more we need to do there. PFAS is in food packaging. It's in a lot of things, and it's a very persistent chemical. Coal tar, we're doing some work to disclose that coal tar is a known carcinogen. And then a little bit on groundwater monitoring. On agriculture and local food, that there's a lot we're doing there. We have a number of things to encourage local food development, like cottage food, or increasing the purchasing of the local food purchased by the state government. And then banning pre-treated seeds and ethanol production. That one is moving forward. And there was an issue in one of the Western states where pre-treated seeds with unicotinoids were used in ethanol production and caused a huge pollution issue. Conservation, we have a really important bill that will provide more resources to a fund that will help with conservation cropping and reducing nutrient pollution from agriculture. An important bill on transportation that will require performance-based planning on transportation facilities rather than the political process we have now. I do have EJ permitting here. And then there are a number of bills that we introduced that aren't going to be heard this session, but we put them in, things on a lot of extended producer responsibility legislation. A lot of waste issues are not moving forward this year. It's really difficult in the pandemic to move forward waste issues. So that's a little bit there. So I definitely can talk some more, but I really want to hear more of your questions about what you're working on and how you feel some of this impacts your work. So anybody have any questions for me?
I have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
So I noticed one of the bills that isn't under committee, was it?
Mhm.
One of those last bills you were discussing was about setting standards for enabling consumers to bring their own reusable containers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we we've been working on allowing people to use their own personal containers at restaurants and retailers for a while. There are some liability issues where they don't want to use them, and also some worries about contamination issues. We were copying a piece of legislation this year from California that would create health standards for the use of personal containers for takeout and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there was a lot of concerns from the public health community about it, and we just weren't able to resolve them this year, but I'm hopeful about resolving them next year. But it is a bill that would create sanitation guidelines, which would hopefully help a lot more restaurants and retailers feel like they could accept personal containers because they would know how to handle them properly. So that that unfortunately the Public Health Association was not excited about. So it is not moving forward.
I don't know if this is helpful in any way, but I do know that
Oh,
one of the local groceries, oops, are you still there? Uh-oh.
It looks like we might have lost Ben. Just a
Oh, no.
second. Let's see if we can get access back. Sorry, that happened during your question, during the middle of your sentence.
Yeah, that's chill.
Oh, okay. Looks like we've got Jen back.
okay, I'm back. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. My internet just did a little unstable dance. So,
I was just gonna say, if it's helpful, I know that one of the local grocery stores here, Common Ground Food Co-op, okay, you're nodding, you're
Yeah.
already aware, they, before the pandemic, were allowing customers to use their own containers in the bulk section.
yeah, yeah, no, there's a bunch of places that do allow it, even though there haven't been these health standards before, but we're hopeful that this would encourage it even more.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Just a reminder, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type a question in the chat and I can read it for you. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat currently.
As an undergraduate student, what do you recommend we just work on, and like how do you recommend we try to get experience firsthand before?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think, it depends on what you want to do. And if advocacy is something that you want to do as a career, there's definitely advocacy out there. And I do find that in a lot of this, you learn from education sense or academic sense, you learn about uh, policy, you learn about those other things, but there's a lot that you may not learn about advocacy and movements and how things get done. So I definitely recommend finding volunteer opportunities where you can experience that. And so I was really deeply involved in Students for Environmental Concerns as an undergrad and graduate student. Was the president of the group when we passed the clean energy fee. That's now the student sustainability fee. And so like learning from those experiences of advocacy and volunteerism, I think is super important. So you can work on understanding how power works, on developing those relationships, understanding what influences people. All of those can be really important. And then, definitely, I know there are fewer internships now, but finding those internships where you can get advocacy experience. I don't know. I'll put a blog in the chat a little bit later about career development items, but definitely one of my advices for internships and finding your career and what you want to do is definitely to try a lot of things, because I think that you can try a lot of things and figure out stuff that you want to do and you don't want to do. And I think that that's really important. I mean, it can be stuff about understanding what kind of work environment you like, who you are as a person, that you really learn from interning and volunteering. So those are some things that I would definitely recommend to learn more about in this. So
Okay.
I'll copy and paste this blog really quick, but if anybody has any other questions, even career stuff, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah,
While folks are thinking, I have a question for you. So, is there anything about Illinois in the legal sense that makes it unique? Are there unique challenges that we face as a state and as a community? And how have you kind of circumvented those challenges through your work?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think that people may look at Illinois and we have a super majority of Democrats in both chambers. And folks may look at that and just tend to think like Democrats are more associated with environmental protection at this point. Like, Illinois must be easy to get things through. But we tend to not be a leader. We tend to want to look at other states doing things first and states that are similar to us. So if California or New York does something, we are not eager to follow their lead. But if Minnesota or Michigan does something that's more important on environmental protection, we may be really interested in it. So that's just a little bit about where we may be a little different. I mean, we did have basically the same Speaker of the Illinois House for 40 years who really had um, control over a lot of things and control over whether certain things advanced. I definitely had the speaker personally kill a couple of bills that I put in at one point, and that is not the case anymore. The speaker was just not reelected, and there's a new speaker, so definitely like a new environment that we're operating under. I also would say that we have a fairly sizable and well, agriculture is an extremely important influence on the state. There's just a lot of economic impacts in terms of agriculture. There's a lot of land area that's being used by agriculture. So that tends to be something that, and row crop agriculture tends to be something that is a really big influence to Illinois lawmakers throughout the state, even if they're not here. We are one of the top 10 coal producing states, even though very little of our coal is burned within Illinois. And we do produce an amount of oil and gas. We don't have any high volume hydraulic fracturing, but we do have some oil and gas. So those tend to be things that influence environmental protection. And I also would say we are 49th out of the 50 states in the amount of preserved area per person in terms of natural areas, which is really disappointing. And so, yeah. That's a little bit where Illinois maybe is different, has different challenges, different stakeholders that might be powerful, important than other states.
Thank you for that really thoughtful response. I think for me, thinking about Midwest culture and the geographic setting of our state in reference like to the lakes and just like the geography has probably a larger influence than I would think. So awesome. Does anybody have any other questions?
Sorry, Julia, I was just wanting to jump in to develop on that question, was dealing with issues that are within the Midwest, which are regional, and cooperating. Do you form collaborative relationships with people in your field, in Indiana or Michigan or Iowa, when it's dealing with issues having to do with watershed and regional issues, the lakes, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, regional issues, there are some places where that tends to happen. But it's a little awkward because there's not really decision-making bodies there, right? So there's not like a United States of the Midwest. And so whenever you want to do a thing that you're doing on a regional basis, you really need to do it on a state-by-state work. I mean, I know there are things, especially with the Great Lakes treaties, that we might be working against the Midwest or working with Canada on different things, but things still have to be adopted by the different Midwestern states. So I'll just give an example of, for a lot of people, the Brandon Road project in near Joliet to keep Asian carp out of Lake Michigan is a really important project. And we had to do a physical engineering and design study. And the state of Michigan really stepped in, a little bit of Wisconsin too, to help us pay for it, because it's so important to the state of Michigan that Illinois not let carp in. So they paid for a lot of the physical engineering and design study because of how important it is to them. I'm definitely interested in the way that climate regulation may happen in the Midwest, especially when we have more governors that believe in climate change elected throughout the Midwest, because that could be a really good carbon market. We're not a huge fan of carbon markets because of the environmental justice impacts, but doing a regional approach to carbon could be a really big deal. But it is really interesting. We definitely compete with the Midwestern states a lot more than we would like if somebody brings me a law from California or New York, I know I might bring that to a lawmaker and they'll be like, we can't do what, California is doing. But if I bring something from Iowa, they're like, oh, maybe. In Iowa, there's a lot that they have done wrong on things, but there are some really neat laws that I would love to emulate. Things like a buffer rule for agriculture that is pretty substantial, or the fact that, like a huge amount of Iowa's energy at this point comes from wind power. So those are all things that I think we could be emulating that we're not. And I think a lot of ways Minnesota's doing better than we are. So I do think that regional collaboration, regional competition is super important. But there's not, like I said, there's not great bodies of government to which to do that. So we really have to trust each other and do stuff at the state legislature level or governor level to make things happen.